Welcome to another edition of what we are calling, what are we calling this again?
Or whatever Matt wants, I think is what we're
Tea,
calling
And I'm
tea
okay with
leaves,
whatever Matt wants to. So whatever Matt wants.
tea
Still
leaves,
figuring it out.
TEA leaves Houston is what we're calling it. TEA is taking over Houston School District. This podcast and conversation is really meant to be a way to help the community understand all the dynamics that are happening right now, the disinformation, the confusion, the distractions. And so today we're talking about libraries. That's the most recent distraction that has hit the papers and the news the last few weeks. Politicians jumping into this conversation. So what we want to do is quickly frame some of this. What did we hear in the last week or so around this issue with libraries? Anybody want to take a stab at just kind of framing that?
I get mad when I talk about it. So you go ahead.
I similarly feel like that we've just accelerated the school to prison, cradle to prison pipeline by what's happening. So I'm with Tori. I get real affected by this conversation. So Matt, why don't you, in a reasoned way,
sure,
as you're the
sure.
reasonable person.
I'll do my best. So Superintendent Miles has moved librarians out of certain schools, and I guess as a way to save money, as a part of his initiative to bring more energy and focus into the academic rigor of the schools that are struggling. That set off a firestorm of conversation. The mayor weighed in and some inflammatory language. Of course, then superintendent jumps back in and there's a back and forth playing out in the media. For us, the four of us, this is like a great example of how decisions are made poorly within a district and how that leads to distraction and anger and elevated emotions, and nobody's focusing on the outcomes that matter most. And so what we're going to do today is pick this issue apart. Again, Mike is kind of the governance person, the governance expert, so to speak. Tori is kind of she's done everything. So, but in this conversation, she's really kind of the school leader, teacher, and parent kind of person. I'm going to be the parent guy as well. And then Uyosa is the kind of the youth and the student perspective around these things. And so who would like to start the bidding for our listeners to kind of understand what this could have done, or what this could look like, and why we actually made a real stumble here?
I think the mayor took an opportunity to jump out there because he needed one, because he was always against the TEA takeover. I wish, he's actually a friend of my husband's, I wish I had talked to him before he did this. Of course, no one in their right mind wants to see a library closed, right? I mean, that's like, who wants to see a library closed? But the reality is the libraries aren't being used. They're not being used, and they are not technologically savvy. So, I mean, libraries are a lot different than they were. So when I listened to the press conference yesterday, I heard all these wonderful people who I love and support talking about their experiences in libraries when they went to school. Well, that's not what's happening in libraries right now. And the data in HISD screams that kids cannot read.
Amen.
Librarians in the past were not always, they were nice people, really sweet little ladies who had stories, and everybody has this great memory of their librarian. And I mean, to my knowledge, like the librarians in the schools that I've worked with in the last 10 years were creating parties, like doing celebrations in schools and book celebrations, but they weren't really doing a lot of librarian things like what librarians did when we were in school. So kids aren't reading. The space is not being used. The books are antiquated. The books are old, and they don't address the interests of our children at this point. So you've got this space. The last school that I worked in, and I won't name the school, but my job was to manage discipline in the school, like an assistant principal, but that wasn't my title. And I used the library as my place for in-school suspension because it was the room in the building that was not empty. Used. And the kids didn't even want to go in there. So they kind of thought it was kind of punishment. And unfortunately, I used the space, but it was very effective because it was a great space. It was set off from everybody. It was quiet. But I wish that Miles would have said that he wanted to have a behavior center in every school, not a discipline center, because there's a difference. And I wish he would have talked about it from the perspective of, gave some options other than just the library. And that, because I think messaging is important. And I think the message that went out was that he thinks libraries are not important. And I don't know that anybody feels that way. I think that, you know, I was kind of lost in, and people just kind of jumped on this library thing. But I really wish that these people who are out fighting about this library would have came forward and fought a long time ago. We got kids that cannot read.
Right.
We got adult children, adult teenagers who are virtually unhireable when they graduate school. And you fighting for a library in a school where kids can't. I don't understand it for nothing. If I could just get half of those people to fight for the right thing, we'll be doing good.
So,
hey, Matt.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Let me jump in. So yeah, couldn't agree
Thank
more.
You, Tori.
And I think that the system is flooded with change right now. The system is overwhelmed. It cannot keep up. The news cycle doesn't happen fast enough for us to all keep up. I sent y'all the list of somebody posted on Facebook of 30 plus things that have happened in the last 3 weeks. It's too much. And so I think what's happening is this is my opinion, but it's based on my experience of being in a governance role on a school board. What's happening right now is autocratic, in my opinion. It's happening from a top down. I haven't heard, and I challenge anybody to find a reference to the board of managers since July 1st. I can't find it. They, as far as I can tell, they've gone silent. And whether you agree or not with the process by which TEA took over the district, there is a process in place here that seems like it's just completely being disregarded. We all sat through, or several of us, I think, maybe all of us sat through the training to potentially be on that board of managers, and the highlighting of community engagement as a centerpiece of that governance process, which I fully believe in, and my record supports how fully I believe in the importance of community engagement. That isn't happening. So we're getting these just blasts of one thing after another thing after another, and people are it's all reactive, and it's all backing up against the ropes, and there's no space for conversation. It's all reaction. And so it's the mayor comes out after the fact and says, "You're a whatever," and Miles says, "No, I'm not." Right. And the decision's already happened. And so my solution to this is, where's the opportunity for not, I just did it, which is what we're hearing right now, right? It's done, and you can be on my team or not, but rather what's supposed to be happening, which is actual engagement of the community in these important decisions that affect the most important thing in our community, which is our children. And I don't see that happening. So that's my view.
Uyosa, what are your reactions to this?
Yeah, I think in three different kind of areas of thought. Whenever I saw the news pop up on my Instagram feed, because the Houston Chronicle kind of put out a little graphic, I thought of a couple things. One, I thought to a couple years ago when I publicly said that if the TA were to come in, they'd be successful, but students wouldn't be, right? They will, by any means possible, raise these test scores, whether that be in some of the harshest discipline, excommunicating kids from the learning environment, putting kids in DAEP, closing down schools if they must. They will do anything that's necessary. And I think that this library situation is just another note that they're going to do as anything that they need in order to raise test scores. Now, in my experience, yes, I'm 25, but I work with so many kids that I think at this point I'm pretty tuned in. When I'm speaking with young people, they're talking about some of the same things that I was talking about when I was in high school. The interest in having more time to think, more space to breathe, more arts education, right? Tori is totally right in that these libraries are not being engaged in. However, it doesn't mean to do away with them. It means it's the opportunity to meet the needs of young people and reimagine a library as a space for learning in the 21st century, which brings me to this third vein of thought, which is this is such a huge missed opportunity, right? Yes. The TA and the commissioner has, in an interview, said that this is also an opportunity to bring more funds to the schools. How about we bring more funds to the schools in order to update, have more librarians, right? Update our libraries to what they need to be to combat disinformation, right? To combat this rise in AI that we know that's going to completely distort reality for learners in all the different ways. Their ability to research and understand new information as it's coming to them on a massive scale and quick pace than it's ever been is crucial, right? And I think that this has been a huge missed opportunity, and it's expected that politicians will jump on an optic situation. I think that is part of their job, but we know that it's not as productive of a discussion than what could be had.
Boy, well stated. So let me add to that. Missed opportunity. I think that's the perfect language. What could this have looked like? And again, when we're talking about solutions as a community, we need to be thinking about what is supposed to happen so that we can advocate for something different. What could have happened is Miles or the board, ideally the board of managers, saying, we are going to target reading. We are going to put reading in the center of our focus, and we're going to have a community conversation for the next 30 days about all the ideas we're going to use to grow this thing. And at the end of that 30-day period, we're going to take some bold steps. And some of you will not like those steps, but we want to hear from as many people. We want to, right? That then would have galvanized the conversation. The mayor would have been a part of that conversation. We would have had teachers and the whole conversation about how is this space of libraries not being utilized well. Ideas could have come up around, hey, what if we make that into a more of a maker space? Or what if then monies would have come in, then ideas would have come in, and now we wouldn't have been in a situation of everybody now circling the wagons in the circular firing squad. So as a parent, I am now saying to myself, I've talked to some parents as recently as Sunday. Parents are saying, oh my gosh, this thing is imploding. Like, I don't know where, to Mike's point, I don't know where the next bomb is going to be dropped from. I just know that every week, I don't know if my kids are going to be able to function in the system, right? So, and that's for the families that are paying attention. There's a whole bunch of families that aren't paying attention, and we're missing the opportunity to elevate this conversation so that they can hear that there's going to be a focus on reading and all hands on deck. So it frustrates me.
But the thing that we have to think about is, like, I think you could call it like the elephant in the middle of the room, is the behavior. Like, one of the main reasons why teachers are not going back to the classroom is because of kids are pepper spraying them, fighting them, recording them, sabotaging their car, doing some unreal, things that people are, and you don't hear a lot about that. You have to kind of find a podcast to hear teachers that are talking about what's happening to teachers. And so I applaud him for wanting to address that, because I've complained about the fact that I feel like TEA has not addressed with the discipline standards that procedures and protocols and policies that are in place with TEA right now don't really address those kids, because they get to go away and they come right back. We had teachers, I know teachers personally, who were marking kids present, who were not present, who were problem children because they didn't want them in the classroom, and they didn't want the officers going after them because they didn't want to bring them back, because they loved the fact that the kids weren't in class so they could actually teach without being afraid. So these are things that are happening every day. So him addressing discipline, I don't like the word discipline. It's a behavior issue. It's a lot bigger than that. So like you said, if we use this center in a way that was social emotional learning type of things were taking place or was being addressed, because I think that would address a lot of the discipline problems, or like something that would stimulate them in a way where they could learn how to think, a higher level thinking, something like that. Like you said, what are the options? But not to say I'm taking libraries away, because for the truth is, libraries have been gone. They've been gone. Elementary school teachers, school children like talk about libraries, but middle school and high school kids, it's a place to go do research. You didn't have a library class anymore, but the library was there not being used. So how could we make that space more, something that's, definitely a better resource for kids? And how can we address the problems with behavior that we're having in these schools so that teachers will feel more comfortable? And then parents, you know, you have parents who go to who come to like a Yellowstone Academy specifically for safety.
Hmm.
They're not even addressing the fact that their kids are not, they don't know that if what kind of school Yellowstone is academically. They just know the restrooms are safe and clean, and that the chances of something happening to their kid at that school is not as likely as it is school right down the street.
That's right.
So we've got, I mean, I applaud him for address. He just did it wrong. He just did it wrong. You know,
which creates more problems. Mike,
and if we had done what Mike said and had these town hall meetings, people like me could have said what I just said.
I mean, I don't think there's a lot of disagreement here on the issue. It's a what happens now, and you know, Tori, to your point, I hear from people what's coming next. Well, some of the what's coming next is going to be fairly obvious. It's going to be the kinds of really autocratic decisions that, if not made with community input, are just going to elevate the noise level. So I don't know what those are. I have some suspicions about what's coming. I think we all have some suspicions about what's coming. But if it's done, but if it's done from a top down with no input from the community, well, I mean, the podcast is called TEA Leaves. At some point, they will leave. At some point, whether it's 5 years or the mayor says 7 years, at some point they will leave. And when they leave, what's the crater going to be? What's it going to look like? If this is done without any community input, we'll have what happened in other districts where that's been the case, where the snapback is wicked. And in the process of all that, we lose a generation of kids. We're going to lose 5 years of kids. And, you know, I don't have the answer to the question. I'm not smart enough to know what the right answer is. But what I do know is that as a community, we do. As a community, collectively, we do. Because we put a person on the moon. We as a community have figured out a way to get Justin Verlander back today. And the good things are happening in this city. And what never works, and what has never in the history of people worked long term, is one person making all the decisions as if they have all the answers. And Superintendent Miles seems like he's got a real good targeted idea for how to improve things. I just wish he'd bring some other people on board on the bus before he just drives it off, off of whatever.
Yeah.
That's
man. Well said. Yeah. I know you got to leave here shortly. So I'm going to give you plenty of space here to share your thoughts.
For sure. I think this is a super sensitive, extremely fragile place, and probably the most fragile area of human society, right? Mm-hmm. Learning, which is a two-way street, right? Not a one-way street in which is being proposed at this moment, where I do, and then you will mimic or move because of sort of dominance, right? So we know that young people have to also buy in, right? And I think that is relatively a modern view of education, but I'm going to go with it, right? And because of that, I think, the way that this is all structured, it makes it harder, even if we were probably following the process that we know is not being followed. It still would have made it harder for regular community folks, students, parents, teachers to have input in a democratic kind of way, right? Because they could put in, but they can't really mandate or vote out, right, a board of managers. But I think that from an organizing perspective, what's really important is that we figure out what we want, right, in our respective communities, and make that very clear. And we organize the mess out of it, right? So what does that look like? I think that looks like having conversations with young people on like, what isn't an ideal learning environment for you, right? What does that feel like? What does that look like? What does that smell like? What does that taste like? Take me from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Oh, you don't even want 8 a.m., you want 10 a.m.? Okay, let's discuss that. Let's get that really clear for ourselves, because what I don't want us to do is to pretend that we have the structural space and the emotional buy-in to co-create with Miles or the board of managers, because they're not here to co-create with us. And they've already made it very clear, unfortunately. I think we should continue to try to do that, but that should happen on the terms of a very clear vision on all of our parts. Doesn't have to be a huge, everyone across Houston agree, but we all need to do this in our respective areas and have students as the clear focus, and also their lives post high school, from a career, theological, whatever you want it to be kind of standpoint. Think of that vision while you're co-creating with young people.
So, but it's slow. That's slow work, right?
Right.
That's not splashy or sexy. Talking to young people about what they actually need. I'm not sure if the mindset of change agent leadership is at that level, right? Change, because what I'm seeing is the change is, like Mike said, it's autocratic, it's top down. Here's the next thing I'm going to do, and if there's pushback, deal with it, because I'm going to change this thing for the better. And long term, short term, maybe to your point, so maybe there's some progress, but long term, there's going to be a really hard snapback once this thing goes back.
We talked about this in our first podcast, the what happens when. And yeah, if your outcome determinative is, as you have put it, test scores, they're going to succeed. There's no question, because they're gonna succeed. That's
Right.
You can make test scores go up a lot of different ways, some of which are legit, some of which aren't.
Right.
I don't have any information about what they're going to do, but I would bet you that come April of next year, test scores have gone up. But to what end? To what end? What's the outcome? And that's where your comments are so important about, engaging and I always viewed students as the consumer. They're the customer. It's not the parents. It's not the teachers. It's not me. It's not the community. It's the kids.
Yep.
The students are the consumers. That's who we market to. And when they make, as Tori said, a choice to go elsewhere, well, they've made a conscious choice, because we're not offering a product that they want to buy.
Right.
It's not interesting to them. And so that's why it's important. That engagement is so critical.
Uyosa, hold on. Last comment, because I know you got to roll.
Yeah. Right before I think one of the things to note is, if we are to use the marketplace analogy in thinking about education, I would encourage us to all think that they're all customers of it all, because we're all being affected. That's why, unfortunately, it takes a little bit of finagling and thinking through how we work together and co-create together with young people as at the forefront. It's a really complex kind of thing, because we're all affected by, right, that young person that can't read after high school, right, that we're engaging in the workplace. We're all, it's all very much cleared together. We're all affected by that next tech person that comes out with this really big invention that actually ends up displacing many workers and has no ethics attached to it, right? So it all stems. I think we, yes, for sure, should think about young people and how they're affected, but we should also think that I'm being deeply, my future and the legacy that I want to leave is deeply being affected. So I agree, and we should broaden that marketplace analogy. But I think that for sure we need to get involved immediately within our board of managers and board meetings. And I know y'all will talk more about it, but that's what I have for now.
Maybe we can invite one on to help kind of get a sense of what's happening, and that maybe maybe there's something happening behind the scenes that we just aren't aware of. Tori, any thoughts? Thank you, Uyosa. Really appreciate your comments, dude, and keep being an activist out there, dude. Appreciate you.
All right. I think he's right. I think he's absolutely right. Finding ways to get into those spaces to where, those members are. I mean, like Mike said, we haven't seen them. I don't know what they're doing. We haven't heard about them. We don't know what they're doing, what decisions they're making. We may be able to even get in touch with AJ. He's usually really, really willing to talk about like what's actually happening. I believe they have a whole lot to do with it. I do believe that, initially out the gate, there was so much going on with them, and there were threats against their lives. Yeah. So many of them that may have changed the trajectory of what they were planning on doing, and understandably, because it was really serious. Yeah. So that may be why they're laying low and we haven't heard from them. I have to believe just the AJ that I think I know is making sure that they are.
Yeah, just for those folks that don't know, AJ Craybill, he worked for the TEA, and he's the trainer that led the training that preceded the appointment of the board of managers. Continue to.
And he's actually coaching them now. He said that he would be coaching them as long as they wanted it. And I'm sure this time around he's more involved than he was with the last board at HISD. So I'm positive he's more involved, and he had a whole lot to do with the choices that were made and who was chosen. But I just believe that there's more to it than we know. Like Mike says, it's like, I just not knowing that part of the work, being on the front line, I'm not familiar with that. But I do believe that there's power in people. If the mayor can get on the television with all these pastors and politicians, I agree that they need to, instead of just going out complaining about, what TEA is doing, because they're not going anywhere. Just really come up with some realistic, first of all, use the real life data. Kids can't read. I mean, like I just almost felt bad for our mayor when he's up there fighting for libraries in schools that probably have more dust in them than anything. I mean, if the books in there are older than all of us put together, and I just don't know that he knows that. Like, I'm just like, I wish he would have went and kind of did or had some people to do some research before he went out talking about something that was really.
But it's become it's become oppositional. It's become adversarial, and we're not 60 days into this yet. They appointed the board of managers June 8th, and we're oppositional and adversarial. You got the mayor calling them idiots. You got the superintendent saying I'm right and you're wrong. That's somebody's got to lose that conversation, and that makes it. And ultimately, those are grown-ups who are going to win or lose, and the kids, the students. Where are they? Where's the conversation about what's in the best? And I get that. I do not attribute to the new superintendent anything other than he wants success for the kids. I don't have any reason to think otherwise. This isn't, but I think the way he's going about it is going to be really challenging when he's facing a wall of opposition on a constant basis.
Awesome.
And he was gonna face that anyway. He was gonna face that anyway coming in, but to not engage the 300 of us who showed up for a whole weekend, I've not gotten any contact whatsoever.
Right.
And I just think it's just a swing and a miss.
And Mike, let's just be clear. Like, we started this podcast because we want to actually be in support of the movement of the board of managers. We want to actually be a voice to encourage and support thoughtful decision making. But like you said, right out of the gate, the actions were so disconnected from the training we received that now even folks who are supportive of TEA's possible changing of things, we are now speaking out negatively about what's happening. And so, but again, long term, we have to keep thinking about long term, like 2-3 years long term. What is it going to look like if we start off oppositional and we continue that? And the only way that we change from this oppositional framework is through conversation. But right now, everybody's angry. We've got the mayor on one side, we've got TEA, we've got school or teachers. We have to dial this down, and that dial down comes through a slower process of conversation, of engagement, young people, parents, etc., as Uyoso described. I don't see any appetite for that right now. And as a result, whatever changes, positive outcomes are happening over the next few months, they will immediately reverse once TEA leaves, and we'll be back to where we were, which nobody can argue is a good place. So I want to make sure that as we talk through these things, we keep thinking about what do we have to do to make sure that 5 years from now, we are on an ongoing positive trajectory, that the community is aligned around that trajectory, that teachers, students, parents, all of us are moving in a common direction, and that's not what's showing up right now.
Right.
Well, the changes are happening as change sometimes does, as if there's one right way and that's it. And the challenge is gonna be that if the outcome that's sought is one outcome, that is test scores on the core subject standardized areas, okay, but I bet you won't have more kids going to post-secondary. I bet you won't have more kids who 6 years after high school are more successful. And so my view, and it's really the Lone Star governance model, which is what TEA had us all go through that 2-day training. The Lone Star governance model and all those questions we get asked during that training about what will you do to engage the community?
Yes,
Right.
And
that was a big part of
there
it.
was talk about going out with another board of managers member
Yep.
and a support team from this district and engaging the community. And where is that?
We offered that as a bunch of
I know you
folks
did.
who were part of that. We said, hey, tap us. We'll be
Right.
happy to open up our own personal networks to folks.
We
It
did.
didn't happen at all.
So that's the
Okay.
part. I mean, Matt, an answer to your
Go ahead, finish your thought. Finish your thought.
But an answer to this question is, how do you make this sustainable? How do you make any change sustainable? Well, it can't be dependent on one person,
Yeah.
because when that one person leaves, whether that by voluntary means or because they choose to leave or whatever, once that person leaves, the ideas don't go with, because nobody's on the team, nobody's on board with the ideas. And these changes are so aggressive and they're happening so fast, and they all may be necessary. But what's the buy-in? What's the non-forced buy-in right now?
Zero.
Who's
Yeah,
on the
nobody
team
knows why.
because they want to be?
Right.
And so, Tori, your point, and Matt, to yours, I agree. That change needed to happen. That's why we all submitted our names for the board of managers. I'm a believer that change. District wasn't heading on a success path for kids, but I don't see this is going to be differently unsuccessful. And
so now what again, we want to keep focusing on solutions, and one of the key solution here is we've got to have a conversation started, and that conversation's got to be broader than one individual saying, here's what's going to happen. What are the networks through which that conversation could go? Like we already mentioned, all the 400 people that signed up for the TEA training, that's a possible network that could be tapped. So far, it hasn't been tapped. There's teacher networks, there's community networks, there's the existing school board. I doubt if they've actually had a conversation around, how to get this conversation out to their constituency. So are there other ideas of how this could work better going forward?
I was really just thinking about what I saw yesterday with the mayor. I mean, if I'm not sure, I don't know how I can get a conversation with this guy. Maybe, you never know. But really, he created a lot in a matter of minutes. Like the way he set that up was great, and he got a lot of, I saw people in the background that I totally respect and honor their work on board with him but I just feel like, I don't know if he's being misled. I don't know if he's listening. I mean, I haven't talked to him. I haven't really been looking into him. I know he was against it, but have to believe that if, he could sit down, we could start with that conversation with him, and that team of people that he brought together was a very powerful team yesterday of people that could just listen to what we're saying today. I mean, I heard them all telling, like I said, their stories about their interactions with librarians and libraries in their lifetime, which really is not the real problem. It's not the problem at all. I mean, like, you're fighting to keep something that's not being used. I don't know that he knows that they're not being used. You know what I mean? I don't know that he knows, I don't know that how familiar he is with the data that supports the reading scores throughout HISD across the board. Not just in Black and brown schools, across the board.
Yeah, I know this. I mean, when Mayor Turner was a state rep, education was a focus of his, and I know when he ran 6 years ago, education was a focus of his, and for a variety of reasons having to do with other both planned and unplanned catastrophes. Perhaps that's been derailed, but I know him to be a person who deeply cares about education and the education of the people from the communities where he started his path. I don't think
Sheila was in the audience. I think she's always been a big advocate for, particularly inner city kids and kids. So I don't know, that's a great place to start to me.
I just wonder if it can not be a political conversation, because that in the world in which we live today, that's that requires potentially somebody to pick a side. And this is not a side picking conversation. It is an equity conversation. One of the things that hasn't been widely discussed, or at least that I haven't heard, is the deep inequity. So you talk about the libraries that aren't being used, but I bet if you go to other schools, In other parts of the community, the libraries are well outfitted. That was the problem when I got on the board in the district I did, where some of the libraries had state-of-the-art technology and some of them didn't. It was deep in
Depends on the
equity and they
neighborhood.
weren't being used because they weren't interesting, you know.
I don't think
And
it's
so
one of the NES schools are not. I would say it's safe to say that most of the NES schools are not. The libraries are not being utilized to their fullest, if at all. The ones I'm familiar with, for sure, I can speak to those. But I agree. I don't. One of the things that I've always wanted us to kind of stay grounded in this conversation is those people who don't know how to speak up for themselves. The parents who really just know they want a great education for their kids, but they don't even know where to start or what to say. People like Sylvester Turner and some of those pastors and Sheila Jackson Lee, it's not political for them. That's the person they trust.
Yes.
They just trust this person because they've trusted these people for so many years with all of the decisions made in their lives, and they don't really understand politics. They don't understand any of that. They just feel like these people will help them get the right things for their families and their children. And so I'm thinking, like, in that conversation, I agree with you, Mike. It's hard for it not to be political, but when you get in certain platforms in front of certain people, I know a person I'm pretty close to that knows how to take the conversation from politics to the right thing if he's given the right opportunity to do that.
So, and I'm thinking of,
I try not to drop names, but
yeah, I think I know that person too.
Matt hasn't given me that permission yet, but
so here's again, like, I want to think about, for the folks, the handful of folks that might listen to this, what do we want to see happen? And I've heard some things. I think I love the idea, Tori, you just described. Like, could the board of managers call the mayor and say, listen, we'd like all the people that came to your meeting to sit down with us and let's start working together on this thing. That would be a wonderful move.
Right.
And board of managers now, again, more board of managers stepping forward into a leadership, and the superintendent following the leadership of the board. That's how this is supposed to
be done. Right.
So that's one idea. And I think the mayor would be, delighted about that, because, frankly, his engagement in this is because he's worried. I don't think it's just political. I think he's worried, to Mike's point, that this is an issue of inequity, right? So how do you bring that energy into a conversation? It really requires a face-to-face conversation, or a series of face-to-face conversations. And to Tori, your point, if that library is not being utilized, can we make that library a resource for not just the kids, but for the larger community? And if this issue of behavior is number one, like, we got to take that on as well. Like, that is the conversation that doesn't seem to happen because there's this top-down push. And I guess I want to make sure that those that are listening realize that there's an opportunity. There is a pathway here where we can get beyond this argument, but it's going to require some courage on the part of board of managers and some political capital expended on the part of those that were, with the mayor and behind him in the conversation the other day. So
yeah,
that's my hope, that we can actually get that movement started.
Yeah, let me add one other thing, or maybe 5 other things, but no, let me add one other thing. One other thing is this. I think until the district understands what it wants, and by the district, I mean the district, all of us in this community, determine what it is that we want. What is the outcome that we want? We will continue indefinitely spinning around in the intersection, hoping we don't get hit by a car. And what happens as a result of an undefined outcome is, it's the old, if you don't know where you're going, all roads will get you there. Right now, the superintendent believes that the road he's on is going to get him to an outcome. The issue for me, from a governance policy standpoint, is that where we want to go? And if we don't, then we're never going to be on the bus with him. And he'll never have anybody on the bus who isn't forced to be on the bus. I had hoped for it, coming out of the board of managers training, that the conversation would be around what we as a community want for our students. What does that look like? That engages the business community, that engages the parent community, that engages the students.
Yep.
Not necessarily, hopefully, in that order, by the way. But that brings everybody onto the team. And then it's the boat rowing in the same direction. And until that point, you will have the newest, greatest superintendent in the world driving right in the direction that it just generates the kind of oppositional conversation that we're hearing, where some people say, well, don't do that. And some people say, yeah, that's great. And nobody, 100% is never going to be the number you get to. You're never going to get 100% happy. But right now we're dividing into camps. It's it's not a success path. So my hope, Matt, to answer your question directly, is that the conversation that started is around what do we want? What's the ultimate outcome for kids? And what is our role, each of our roles in that? That's the question AJ asked us each during the training. And it's the right question. It always has been the right question. So that's the hope, my hope.
Student outcomes won't change until adult behavior changes. And right now we're seeing the same adult behavior that we have seen cycle through the district. And that has not led to student outcomes that we like.
Right.
The question he asked that was powerful for me was, what have you done to improve the lives of students in your community? That's the question for me.
And you're talking about the question that AJ asked during the training.
He asked
the question that AJ asked during the training that each of us one at a time had to answer. Right? What have you done to improve the lives of students in this community? And it strikes me that until we know what we want as a community, we will never get to an answer to that question, because we're asking the wrong question. Is how do you solve the discipline problem? Okay, well, I can solve the discipline problem, Tori. You could solve it tomorrow, right? And you could with enough resources, enough force, you could solve that. But does that achieve the outcome? I don't know, because I don't know what the outcome is. I know what I want, but I'm one person, and if you put me in charge, we would drive this thing in a direction. Matt, if we put you in charge, we drive in a different direction. Tori, if we put you in charge, we drive in a totally different direction than that.
For sure.
And we'd all get to something. But would we get to an outcome that the community wants? I don't think so, because I don't have the right answer, because I'm one person. And that's so if there's a way to get everybody on board with just a conversation about what do we want the outcome to be, that was where we had hoped that coming out of the training. I know we all talked about that. Anyway.
That's right. Let's keep doing our part to not just take shots from the sidelines, but let's keep getting into the conversation and getting into the game. And let's follow up and see if we can continue this conversation a little bit more next week. Next week, I'm sure there'll be other things. And I'd love us to also focus on the thing that Mike cares about most, the thing that Tori cares about most, the thing that I care about most, which is student outcomes. And how can we begin a conversation with the community that may be listening to this to clarify that? Mike, I saw you had another quick thought.
Hey, yeah, you did. Real quick. Let's talk offline about which of the two board of managers you mentioned that you might be calling. And if they don't overlap with the two that I would call, I'm happy to make calls as well to those. And Uyosa is the most important person in the student outcome conversation, because he is way closer to it than I am. Way closer to I'm irrelevant when it comes to that. I'm just barely conscious of what's happening in the 25-year-old's life. So I think his voice is critical.
So maybe another thing is, in the next week or two, we talked about this before, getting some of the young people that are in his network to come on and have some conversation with us. So, all right, we've got some work to do. Y'all, thanks for listening. This is T Leaves Houston, trying to prepare the community for what happens when TEA leaves and trying to make sure that we are ready. So thanks for listening, and more to come. Signing off.